third scene mirror of relationship is perhaps one of the most commonly recognized mirrors. This is the mirror that we sense every time we find ourselves in the presence of another individual and we look into their eyes. And in that moment, this magic happens. This electrical charge tingles through our body. Perhaps the hair on the back of our neck and our arms stands up in the presence of this person whom we may not even know. What has just happened in that moment? Well, through the wisdom of this mirror, we're asked to allow for the possibility that through the course of our lives, in our innocence, to survive life's offering, that we give away huge portions of ourselves in the experience of life itself. That through the course of our lives, pieces of ourselves may be lost unknowingly, or perhaps given away knowingly, or taken from us by those who have power over us. When we find ourselves in the presence of another individual who embodies the very things that we have lost and that we are seeking to find that wholeness in ourselves, our bodies physiologically may respond to that. And we'll know that as a magnetic attraction to this individual. Should you find yourself in the presence of another and for some unexplainable reason drawn to share time with this individual, ask yourself this question: what is it that I see in this person that I've lost, that I've given away, or that was taken from me? And you may be very surprised at what comes back to you, as the reality occurs that within nearly every individual who you will ever encounter, you will recognize this familiarity, and you will sense this piece of yourself, because we see it in one another throughout our lives. The third mystery of relationship. The fourth mystery, the fourth scene mystery of relationship, is a mystery of a little bit different quality. Through the course of our lives, often we will adapt patterns of behavior that become so important to us that we will rearrange the rest of our lives to accommodate this pattern of behavior. When we find ourselves in this situation, often these patterns are identified as compulsive or addictive patterns of behavior. And the fourth mystery of relationship is the mystery that allows us to see ourselves in the presence of addiction or compulsion. Through addiction and compulsion, what happens is that we find ourselves giving away, little by little, the very things that we hold most dear in life. And in the giving away, little by little, we have the opportunity to recognize and see ourselves as we lose the things that we hold most dear. So, for example, when we speak of addiction and compulsion, many people immediately bring to mind alcohol or chemicals or nicotine. And those certainly are patterns of behavior that may be addictive and compulsive. And there are others that are less obvious. Issues of control in a corporate or a family environment. The addictions to sex, always having to have sex, or always having to have money or create money, or abundance in our lives. Those are issues of compulsion and addiction as well. When an individual finds themselves in the presence of this pattern of behavior, what they may be assured of, and the beauty of this pattern, is that the pattern does not occur overnight. The pattern unfolds gradually over time, little by little by little. We give away the things that we hold most dear. If we are rearranging our lives to accommodate a pattern of alcohol or chemical abuse, we may be giving away the portions of our lives, our loved ones, our families, our jobs, our very livelihood to accommodate that. And this is the beauty of this pattern, that it may be recognized at any time, rather than taking it to its extreme and losing all. We may recognize this pattern at any time, heal that pattern, and find our wholeness in that healing. 1992. I was doing a series of workshops very similar to this in Mount Shasta, actually a little town just outside of Mount Shasta called McLeod. If anyone knows where McLeod is. At a wonderful place called the Stony Brook Inn. It was a bed and breakfast, and at that time it was also a retreat center. We had rented out the entire facility. We had the whole place all to ourselves, including a great room downstairs. And in that great room, there was a large screen television, and we were watching our video clips at night. Well, 1992, a gentleman named Richard Hoagland had just come out with a pretty amazing piece of video of a presentation he'd given to a special session at the UN about what he believed we had found archaeologically on Mars with our Viking probes in 1976. And we were watching this as a group. And it was dark. It was in the evening. And the door opened up, and there were two travelers that came in looking for a room. Of course, the inn was full because we had all the rooms, and they happened to see what we were watching, and they said, "This looks really interesting. Can we stay?" And I said, "Sure," and they did. And when it was all over and the lights came on, I looked across the room, and there were two women who were traveling cross-country, and for some reason, one of them looked very familiar to me. I had never met her before, and I just felt that sense of familiarity. Have you ever had that happen? Have you ever been in a public place, maybe the airport coming in here, or a bus station, or a train station, or a mall? Grocery stores are great because no one's expecting it, and no one's expecting it. And all of a sudden, you're not looking for a relationship, you're not seeking anything consciously, and all of a sudden someone may come by you, and you feel them walk past you, and you think, wow, what was that? Or perhaps your eyes will meet. And just for a fraction of a second, while your eyes meet, this thing happens. This magical little thing, this electrical glimmer of recognition. And then more often than not, in our culture, that's not approved. We're not supposed to do things like that. So more often than not, what will happen is we'll find a distraction. You know, if you're walking down the street, we'll do something like this. You know, we'll do one of these things. Or look at a piece of gum on the sidewalk, or anything to break that moment. What just happened in that moment? When you look at someone and you feel that feeling, that sense of familiarity, what just happened? I worked with a group of engineers at one point in my life, and one of them was a gentleman that had this happen many times each day. Many times. And typically it happened with women. And what would happen was he would leave our office for a period of time. He might go out for lunch. Friday afternoon, we'd all get a paycheck, we'd go to the bank, cash our paycheck, get a bite to eat, run some errands, and we'd come back. And he'd sit at his desk. And I'd say, "What's wrong?" And he'd say, "I can't work." And I'd say, "Why not?" And he says, "Well, I fell in love over lunch." He'd fall in love multiple times per day. And it wreaked havoc in his life. This is how these mirrors come up to us. That's why I'm going to share with you true life stories. It happened so often that we even had a name for it in our group. We called it getting slapped. And he'd go for lunch, and I'd say, "How was lunch?" He'd say, "Well, I got slapped 5 times." And I knew he fell in love 5 times. So we'd get back to work, and he'd sit there, and then he might do something like he'd call the bank where we cashed our checks and say, "Who was the teller, the third one from the left, over the lunch hour?" He'd get her number, and then he'd call her. And he'd say, "Would you like to meet for coffee after work?" And she'd say, "Sure," sometimes. And so they go meet for coffee. And while he was having coffee with this woman, he'd look at the waitress that brought them the coffee. And he'd feel that he was in love with the waitress. And it happened again and again. It was particularly a problem for this gentleman because he had a wife, 2 wonderful children, and he loved them very much. It wreaked havoc in his life. Now, this is an extreme. Hopefully it's an extreme. Hopefully it's not like this in your lives. And I use it as an example because it's such a vivid example. What is happening in that moment when we feel that feeling? What's going on? Well, this is what happened to me in Mount Shasta. And it's happened to me every once in a while in my life. This has happened to me very few times. And the lights came on. I looked across the room. There were 2 women there. One of them, I looked at her in the eyes, and I had that feeling. That magical thing happened. And everyone said their good nights and went to bed. And she and I were talking, and I said, "Would you like to go for a walk outside?" And she said, "Sure." I don't know if you've ever been to the town of McLeod or not. A walk around McLeod takes about a minute and a half, maybe. And we did. We did the circuit down past, there's an old lumber mill, and there's a museum, and a post office, and an ice cream shop, and then we were back. And I said, "I enjoyed that." And she said, "I did too." And I said, "Would you like to do it again?" And she said, "Sure." So we did this several more times. that evening, and it got late, and eventually we said goodnight. I never got her name. We said goodnight, and that was that, I believed. Well, it was on this same journey that a very powerful friend came into my life. I'll begin this story now, and it will have its completion before we have completed our science of compassion. It was underneath the front steps of the Stony Brook Inn that a mama kitty had given birth to a litter. She'd never done this before. She apparently didn't know or wasn't capable of nursing, and all the litter died. They believed. And it was while we were there at this workshop, the mama came out carrying this little bag of fur and bones, and he was still alive somehow, and he hadn't eaten since he'd been born. And they said, well, this is magic, that this animal has such a will to live, we'll name him Merlin. And they did, and Mr. Merlin was a beautiful, all-black little male kitty. Was supposed to be an outside cat. There were no animals allowed inside the Stony Brook Inn. Well, the night that I got there, he found my room. Somehow he got in, found my room. He meowed. I opened the door and let him in. He never left. And he was with me the entire week that I was there. And he was being nursed back to health. We slept together. We dined in my room together. He'd stand on the edge of the sink while I shaved and watch me. He'd stand on the edge of the tub while I was showering, and he'd catch little water drops in his whiskers that were bouncing off my body, and we became very good friends in that short week. As my workshop was coming to a completion, it was time for me to come back to New Mexico. And they said, we have our quota of animals. Would you like to take Merlin with you? And I did. I said, sure. Well, that morning I was leaving, and I had to go into Mount Shasta to get the things that you need to take an animal with you when you travel cross-country. I got a leash. He was a leash-trained kitty, and little kitty water bowls and litter boxes and all the things that you need. Well, I was driving down the street, and I stopped at a light, and I looked up, and there on the corner was the woman that I'd seen the night before. See, the story is going somewhere, and it does tie together. It works out really well. And she was there, and she looked at me, and I looked at her, and she came over the window, and I said, hi, how are you doing? She said, fine, and the light turned green, and people were honking their horns. And I said, have you eaten yet? And she said, no. And I said, would you like to? She said, yes. She got in. We shopped for Merlin's things, and we went to a wonderful little cafe at the south end of town. And we sat and talked and talked and talked. And we were there for the rest of the morning, and the breakfast people left, and it got really quiet. And then the lunch people came in, and it got very busy. And then they left, and it got really quiet. And she was driving back to the East Coast, and I was driving back to New Mexico. And finally we said, well, if we're going to leave today, we probably should leave. And she walked me in my car, and I gave her a kiss on the cheek, goodbye. I still, to this day, I don't know what her name is. And as I watched her walk away, this thing happened. And I found this tremendous sadness in my body. I actually began to miss her, and I watched her get in the car, and her taillights disappeared over the road to the highway. 10 years ago, if that had happened, I would have said that I was in love. And I would have done something really romantic, like jumped in my car and flagged her down on the freeway and said something to her. I know what it would have been. And I knew that something else was happening. I knew that's not what it was. And I sat in my car, and all of a sudden, huge tears began coming down my cheeks. And I said, wow, this must be a really powerful lesson that's happening here. First, there was the familiarity. And there was the sense, as she was leaving, there was a sense of sadness. And I simply closed my eyes and asked a question, as I often do. And I said, Father, I ask for the wisdom to understand what is it that I feel in my body. When you ask a question like that, whoever you believe you're asking that question to, you're expecting an answer. And rather than an answer, I got a question back. So they were making me work. And the question simply said, what is it about this woman that you miss? And I hadn't really thought about what it was. I just knew that I missed her. And I began thinking about all of the things that we had shared and all the conversation that we'd had the night before and all at the cafe, all through the lunch hour. And of the many things that had happened, what I knew was that I really missed her innocence. There was an innocence about her, a sense of awe and wonder.